ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.
All right. How's everybody doing tonight? Just give me a shout out in the comments if you can hear me. I just want to make sure. I'm having a little bit of difficulty tonight. We have some bad weather here. And as you know, or you might know, I use satellite internet. So it is affected a little bit by the weather. I see Tony in the chat, and Puffy says I need to get a new time zone. But unfortunately, I don't know what time zone you would be in that it's so late, Puffy. I mean, even if you're East Coast, it's only 11 o'clock, right? Anyways, sound engraver's here. That's great. And let me know that everybody can hear me. Great. All right. So today, well, I'll do what I usually do. I'll introduce my latest campaign very quickly, Crom the Destroyer, that everyone just saw the introduction for. We're doing great. We got about 21 days left in the campaign. We're about to hit, I think, 13,000. So we're doing pretty good. And the link is in the description for Crom the Destroyer. So if anybody wants to either order that book, the link is in the description for the Valiant Heroes as well. And you can order Thomas Valiant through the Valiant Heroes. Also, I didn't put in the description, but Iron Age magazine, Anvil Iron Age magazine #2 is on Fund My Comic right now. It has been open for, I think, I'm not sure, about the last 15 days, maybe. And one of my stories is in that compilation. It is one of the Crom the Destroyer stories. So anyone wants to go and take a look at some good Iron Age stuff. #1, I'm not sure if you can order #1 still or not for Anvil Iron Age magazine. I think the big draw for that one was Razor Fist did a Western comic. I haven't gotten mine in the mail yet, so I haven't got to read that. But my story is one of the top 3 billing for the #2 issue. Again, it's on Fund My Comic. And Crom the Destroyer is, as I said, up on Indiegogo. And the link for it is in the description. Let me put up some art for Crom the Destroyer in the background. I'm hoping to get myself a new intro for these live streams because I want to do them more and more. That is to say, every time I can on a Wednesday or a Thursday. We're going to talk about comics. We're going to talk about making comics and appreciating comics. That's what I want to do here. So if you're someone who makes comics or wants to make comics, learn with me how to make great comics in the ways that people used to make great comics. I'm very much of the opinion that, well, 2009, it's not really opinion. Marvel went in a new direction and said, we want to make comics completely differently than everything that has been made before. And that's the direction they went in, and everybody else followed them. So they completely cut off their history and they don't make comics in a great way anymore. So I'm going back prior to that to actually try to make great comics and go over those old, great, I don't know, not just interviews, but also instructions of how to make comics. So I've been going over lettering last week, and I'll go over lettering a little bit this week. And again, it'll give you some appreciation if you're not someone who makes comics, but someone who just reads comics. A great appreciation for, um, well, let's say an American tradition, an American form of media that is unique unto itself. And if you want to learn again with me those ways, then that's great. That's what we're here for. Hopefully, appreciate comics and learning how they work. So, one of the things that happened to me over the last week, and as I usually say, what I'm going to do is talk for about 20 minutes and then I'm going to go over the chat, see what everybody has to say, and answer any questions. If you have any questions for me about what I'm saying, about any of my campaigns, about my YouTube channel, any of my videos, anything, stick them in the comments. Just put a question mark there or tag me in it so that I know it's for me because people like to talk in the chat. Anyways, talking about art and talking about learning about comics. So I'm trying more and more to go back to things I've seen before or older interviews, but one of the things I ran across was how to make comics, and it was a video that came out fairly recently, within the last year and a half, and it was just on YouTube and it came up in my mentions and I thought I'd click on it. And lo and behold, it was a new video about new people, people who make comics today. And I had just had to turn it off. It was awful. And I didn't want to get contaminated by it, thinking that this is the way you make comics. One of the things they said right off the bat was, basically clutter up your background with a whole bunch of little things that will give the reader some indication about your character, little character traits or quirks that this person might have. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm shutting this off right now before I go any farther because this is nonsense. What you need to do with a comic is use your backgrounds as the backdrop for something like, well, as Will Eisner would say, something like a play, something like a stage play. So you go very light on the backgrounds and you set up what you're supposed to be looking at in the foreground. And that's not to say you can't put some heavy backgrounds in at times, or they can't be detailed, but they need to be detailed in a very specific way in order to actually pull out the story. And I want to go into that, and Will Eisner's talking about that within a later live stream that I'm going to do probably next week, maybe the week after that. But one of the things that I did run across and talk about last week was Will Eisner's use of Will Eisner, the great Will Eisner, who started in the 1940s, was mainly when he did his Spirit comic, but he can go all the way back to the 30s, I do believe, the late 30s. And he says the first real comic book came out around 1934. So the great Will Eisner, that the Eisners are named after, the major comic awards, he says you can use lettering to put a mood into exactly what you're doing with your comic. He says that there's two things working at once, which is to say you have your normal pictures and then you draw out more of the story or you enhance it with your lettering. But at the same time, the way he used lettering, and he suggested that you use lettering, is a way that gives mood to your story, especially if you're going to be using something that is a narration. So you can use that to enhance your mood, to either stress words or to bring to mind some other visual by using different fonts. He's very, very much into this idea of using different word balloons, thought balloons, all this kind of stuff. So again, I want to leave that for Will Eisner, the time I talk about his stuff specifically, but we're going to go over a little bit more about what Blambot has to say. And again, the link for Blambot is in the description as well, where I get a lot of these things. Let's see, Nate is his name, and he has done lettering for comics for a long time now. And some of the ones that I went over last week, I'll just go over really quick here this week. You use I versus I. That is to say, to save space, you only use a capitalized I if you're using Comic Sans very lightly so that you don't actually draw the I away from where it's supposed to go, and you take up less space because it's all about space. It's all about putting things in the correct order and giving your negative space for lettering. And that's one of the things he stresses. And so it's Nate Picos, I think is how you pronounce his name, and you can order his book with all of this stuff in it. Again, I think from his website, which link is in the description. Then he talks about kerning. I don't know exactly how to say that word. Kerning. Anyways, it's spacing between the letters themselves, which is very important. You can't just rip off and do whatever you want with the spacing or use a font that doesn't have correct spacing, especially with the use eyes and Comic Sans. They seem to blend in with other letters. The other thing he talked about was sound effects and how he uses sound effects again as an enhancement to the drawing itself, so that the word itself actually follows, basically, as he shows here, an explosion. So that is something else that Will Eisner also talks about, using, as he says, the sound effects as an adjective to the action, which is exactly what Nate is doing here when he is lettering. One of the things he says absolutely don't do is cross your balloon tails. That is one of the things you absolutely should not do. He says ever. There's always a way around it. There's always a way to not do it. And if you go back to the Will Eisner way of doing things, you should never have more usually than two statements from each of the characters, because if you have a third statement, which is a reply to the first or the second, then you're actually using more moments in time than you capture in the picture. So that's one of the things that Will Eisner talks about. The other thing that Nate talks about, as we went over last week, was properly stacking text, which is to say, to use it in a way that your negative space is not actually going to override your eye and what you're going to draw out of the word balloon. You use as little negative space as possible within whatever you're going to be using, a word balloon or a thought balloon. So again, use of negative space is very important. So this is just for lettering. He says constant balloon tails. That is to say, don't mix and match. Try to have exacting standards for what you use for balloon tails when you're going to be putting them with two people speaking. You don't want to just reduce the size of something. It'll look off to the reader's eye. And at the same time, don't make something that's so sharp that it's going to cut into and look like a line from the art itself. So these are, again, fascinating things I find with just lettering. He talks about, again, negative space and the combination of dialogue, how you're not supposed to make your balloon too small or too large. Again, you have to have a good idea of what the negative space is going to be around your words so that it doesn't draw the eye away from the action, because the purpose of the lettering is to be an art that is unseen. Okay, the only thing that I would think of that you can use it as small, if it's something that's like a mousy reaction to something like that. Now, here's one of the things where Nate talks about using more than one response, which again, Will Eisner would say, don't do that. Not everybody agrees with him on that, but Will Eisner would say that, you're capturing a moment in time with your sequential art. Therefore, if you put a response after another response, then you're using two moments in time, and therefore you're breaking the inclusion of the reader in what you're trying to say. The last thing, I think one of the last things he says is proper use of quotation marks. Again, you can stop these and read them, or you can go over to Blambot and read them. They're on his website. Again, using quotation marks very specifically so that you don't distract the reader for when they're quoting someone. And if it's a long quote, then you put quotation mark at the first of one caption, second caption, third caption, and then wherever it is you end with your quote, and then you put an end onto it. Let's see, using italics in comic dialogue. Now, here's where I would disagree with Nate a little bit, and I would go with the Will Eisner way of using, using lettering. That is to say, use italics to actually stress some words. He talks a lot here, Nate does, because he worked for DC at one point and Marvel, about how it distracts the audience. I don't think it distracts. I think it actually is something that is, what would you say, an emphasis. So if you see old Conan comics from Marvel, then they do emphasize a lot of words to have a better rhythm to the reading of the story itself, if you ask me. Ellipses and double dashes he also talks about, and I use these a lot because people get cut off at points and you want to use them, although there's a difference between using them in North American comics as opposed to European comics, he also points out. So if you want to give your comic a European style, then you're going to have to actually follow the European rules because they do have some different grammar rules, which he points out again, talking about lettering. So that's what I went over last week. And again, a lot of people found that fascinating. A lot of people were actually quite taken by that video. So I thought I'd finish up the things that I didn't get to show last week, which is a couple of pages from Nate's website. And they're going to go by fairly quickly because I'm just putting them in a screen show. So I probably won't keep up with them as I'm going through these ones. Might have to go through a couple of times because, quite honestly, again, this is what I think that you should know about lettering in order if you're someone who's a writer, especially, um, and if you're someone who's just doing the art. Again, the old Marvel method is if you're doing the art, you need 30% of the panel, every panel that you're going to have um, a word balloon in. So you make that bigger or less than when you're going to be putting in a lot of dialogue or less dialogue. So if you're the artist, you have to take that into consideration. And usually the earmark is 30%. Again, if you're going with the Marvel method. And if you're a writer, you have to understand not everything you want to put into a panel might go there. You might have to cut down your dialogue and you might have to take these things into consideration before you write your script. So very important, if you ask me, something I wish I had studied more before I wrote my first script for Thomas Valiant #1. But anyways, let's see. What does Nate say here? The 94% line with cheat. That is to say, you can scrunch up your lines a little bit to 94%. Anything more to pull them together, is that going to look off to the human eye, which is a good thing to point out. So you can cheat a little bit with your line spacing if you need to for some reason, and art will take into consideration that. Talks about layering balloons in conversation. Again, here's the breaking of the Will Eisner rule. Basically, what he says is that have your letterer be consistent. If you're editing your comic book yourself and you're doing the lettering, or you're having a letterer do it and you have to edit it afterwards, make sure he's consistent. So he likes to go, one person, second person, third person, layer on top or layer on bottom, or again, if you're interrupting someone. So it's just be consistent with your lettering, which is something that a professional letterer will do. Oh, uh, I'm working with a professional letterer right now, so I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Eric Withers. Let's see. He gives essentials and tips here near the end of what he has to say. Da, 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 da. Lettering should be clear and legible. These are all things that he's gone over before within some of the things that I talked about. Now, he also talks about making word balloons. Now, this is something I'll probably let the rest of it play and just talk about this for a little bit. I honestly didn't know what exactly was wrong with my comics when I looked at the layering or the lettering sometimes. And he talks about it here when he's talking about the different schools of making word balloons. Now, this is an older program that he's using here and showing, but what he does is he puts a smaller um, white word balloon over top of a larger black word balloon in order to have the exact width that he's looking for the outside of the word balloon. And then when you put your tail on, it's supposed to have a smaller width of black than you actually have, as he suggests, for the main word balloon itself, which again is something to enhance the words itself, and the tag or your pointer or whatever it is you want to call it is just there to try not to draw the eye too much, just enough so that you know what character it's going to. But one of the things that, again, I found was that the exacting standards of doing it digitally actually is quite off putting to someone who is used to a more freehand style of lettering. Now, this is something that Marvel and DC did all the time because this was the old way of making comics. The letterers had to actually cut out the lettering panels and the lettering balloons and slap them onto the actual panels. And then you'd have strippers that would take out any kind of shadows and things like that. So a lot of people worked on the lettering. But the thing is that what Nate suggests is that you draw an ellipse of the size that you normally use and a couple of different ones. He talks about it here too, as well. And then what you do is you freehand it over top of your ellipse, and then you use the freehand one in order to actually put your lettering into it. Why? Because it's not exactly the right size, it's not exactly always the right width, everything like that, but it's much more human. It has a human component to it, which is to say it looks like it's been done by a human hand. And if you're actually lettering something that is going over top of what is being done by a human being, then it looks more natural. Again, I have different artists, various artists. Some of them work digitally, some of them work sometimes digitally, sometimes on paper. Some of them work completely on paper. So Renzo works in both. Whenever he finds he has something that he just can't do digitally, he wants to go back to pen and paper. So he does so. So some of the pages are pen and paper, some of them are completely digital. You have someone like Mike Gustovich, who is working with me on the Rampaging Thor and doing a lot of inking for Crom the Destroyer, things like that. He works completely on a piece of paper, no digital at all. He just prints stuff off and then uses brush and ink when he's doing his inking. And when he's doing, I'll just put that up just one more time while I'm talking. While he's doing everything like that, I don't know about how Nick actually works, if he does more digitally or not. I know sometimes he actually works on digital because the covers that he did for my comics are all digital, whereas some of the art I know that he has done for Crom the Destroyer is done by hand. So again, I'm not sure with Jim O'Reilly. I think maybe Jim might work completely digitally. I'm not entirely sure. But again, it doesn't matter if you're working digitally or on paper. But again, if you're working on paper or you have an artist that's working on paper, I would say it's much, much more a great idea to use the type of lettering and word balloons that Nate here talks about, whereas to say they're imperfect in some way. Now, consistent, because usually he says just do a couple of them and then use those over and over again as what you're going to typically use. So there is a bit of a consistency within your lettering and your word balloons, but enough of a deviation from what the perfect word balloon ellipse would look like so that it doesn't, again, draw your eye away from the art and to the lettering so that you know you're reading something. Because, as he says, once again, that it's there as an art, your lettering is there as an art to not be seen, and it is to enhance the story in the art. So that's one of the major things that I think I took away from reading all of Nate's stuff. And again, I want to order his book as well. Link in the description for his website. I'm not getting paid for this, but you take good advice where you can get it. And again, he talks here about differing layering methods. It's not just as easy as slapping something on a page. Lettering is an art unto itself. Let me tell you. Once you get into seeing exactly how much is done, he also talks here about radio balloons and thought balloons. How you can't just reduce the size of one. You need to make them so that they actually have the same width between spikes, or the same width between indentations, which is the opposite of spikes. Again, doesn't draw the eye. If you're just reducing the size and making it smaller, then it will draw your eye away from the art itself, and again, distract the reader. And I would take this as being something that is true because, he's been working on lettering, I think, for more than 20 years now. So he also talks about the difference in your sizes of your fonts and all that kind of stuff. Just make sure you stay within the boundaries. Again, this will be something that if you have a good program, will probably be much easier for you. They used to do this all by hand by drawing, on the letter balloon with a blue pen, or with a blue pencil, and then just scrying this entire thing. So, anyways, and again, he talks here about letter spacing, which he had talked about is as kerning. a little bit before. So again, there is again letter combinations, he says, that actually you're going to have to specifically use differently, even though the kerning, you might have to readjust the entire thing for some letter combinations like SPAT and all these kinds of things, just because again draws the reader's attention away from the fact that there's a space here in these words and it looks off and therefore I'm reading something, all that kind of stuff. So I have much more appreciation, let me put it that way, for the letterer than I did a year ago or 2 years ago or ever reading comics. That's one of the things that I think that letterers should get more, um, um, I don't know, praise to say the least. Credit, I guess you can't give them any more credit than giving them credits, but still. And then again, he goes over contextual alterations, all these kinds of things. So he's getting into the very technical when he gets to these last pages that he's talking about lettering from his website. So again, this was, I think, I don't know. I will probably not come back to lettering for quite some time now, except to mention it every now and then, especially when I go over the Will Eisner stuff, because again, he uses lettering. Oh, here's something again that I really like, and I don't think I see it very much anymore. He's talking about color palettes for sound effects, and it's not just sound effects. If you go back to, especially for me, anyways, because I'm doing Crom the Destroyer right now. If you're looking at Crom the Destroyer, and you're probably going to see a lettering that is very much akin to what you would see within the early to mid Marvel Conan the Barbarian, done by John Buscema and Roy Thomas. I'm not sure who the letterer, if they had a main letterer at that time. Let's put some Crom art up in the background since we're talking about Crom. So yeah, they use different color palettes for the word balloons themselves, and especially for the narration boxes, which is to say, they do use light color palettes in order sometimes just to make it an off white, sometimes to make it a yellow, sometimes to make it an orange or things like that. Now, I'll have to say, if you're going to go digital, you can probably get away with more of a deviation in the color palette than you would actually putting it physically on paper. So if you haven't actually experienced this, and I have only the one so far, we're about to go to print for the Valiant Heroes pretty soon, so I'll have a second crack at this. But if you look at something digitally, it's not going to come that sharp when you print it on a piece of paper. So you got to realize that. So your color choices have to be really, really specific. I learned this lesson with the first about 10 pages of Thomas Valiant because it looked pretty good for shading on the first 10 pages where it was night in the digital version, which is to say the pages that the colorist gave back to me. But when I put it onto paper, there were things that just got lost. And especially because you're reducing in size, don't forget that. So things were probably much too dark for those first 10 pages of Thomas Valiant. And the same is especially true, I would say, for your word balloons. If someone's going to have to strain their eyes in order to read the damn word balloon, or especially the caption box, because people tend to make the caption boxes very dark in color in background with a black font, then it's going to be something that's distracting. And a lot of people said to me when I put out Thomas Valiant #1, they said, because they're older people who love comics, they said, "Oh, thank God you put in this larger font for my old eyes to see." But I find that again, it's the coloring as well that you need to watch out for um, within word balloons. Again, if you're going back to something like 80s Conan, which is what I'm going back to for Crom the Destroyer. Again, you're looking at that Crom the Destroyer panels in the background. What you do is you got to make sure you see an emphasis. Well, you do see an emphasis within uh, color use within the balloons and text box themselves, but make sure that when it translates onto the page, it's not going to get lost. So that's one of the things that I really have to pick up on and actually make sure I pay more and more attention to. So that's the last of my geeking out about comics about lettering. And I know it's probably getting a little bit boring to people to hear me talking about lettering so much, but I love comics and I love making comics, and I appreciate the lettering much more that I know that about making comics. So let's go through some of these comments here and see who's here. Thank you everybody for showing up. I got 24 people in the chat already. Let's see. Tony's here. Puffy's here. Sound Engraver's here. Always have to give a shout out to Sound Engraver. She has a great channel. You can click on her, click on her avatar, go over to Sound Engraver's channel. She talks about a lot of the things I talk about, but in a musical vein. So she has, I think, a master's in I'm not sure. What is it, Sound Engraver? Music composition, something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she knows a lot more than I ever will know about music. So let's see, scrolling down. Let's see. Stress Level is here. He says, "Hey, RJ, how you doing, Stress Level?" Let's see. I'm just going to show these anyways. I never noticed Stress Level's avatar. That is very stressful. All right, let's see who else we got here. Eddie's here. He says, "How you doing, RJ?" I'm doing great. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Let's see who else we got here. Breaker's here. How you doing? Breaker, I cannot make out what in the world your avatar is. Is it some kind of Gundam? I really don't know. Let's see. Sound Engraver says, here we'll get into the chat. Chat is limited for me tonight. My main computer browser won't let me send a message. Okay, that's good to know. If I ask you a question and don't get an answer, don't worry, I will not feel snubbed. All right, scrolling down just a little bit here. Michael's in the chat. Said, had a weird day, had to end it on a high note. Well, that is praise indeed. If you're coming over to me to end it on a high note. Thank you very much. Let's see. Scrolling down. I apologize if I put your comment up on the screen and it has nothing to do with me. I have to do it usually to make it a little bigger so that I can read it because I'm going through these so fast. Breaker says, I don't know why my previous comment didn't post, so here it is again. Saving space explains why all my comics have captions in speech. I've always wondered about that. Saving space explains why all my so the page saving space explains why all my comics have capitals. Okay, see in speech. I've always wondered about that. Yeah, basically, it's Comic Sans is basically all capitals, anyways. You'll see a lot of comics today that use different fonts and different ways of doing your lettering with fonts. And while I appreciate, especially even going back to things like Swamp Thing in the 70s, at least, I don't know when the first Swamp Thing came out. Was it the 70s or the late 60s? But anyways, you see a lot of interesting font usage back then, and it just grew and grew until what we got today. I honestly want to go back simply to Comic Sans because that's the main American comic book look for the history of comics. And so there's different variations on Comic Sans that you can use, but mostly Comic Sans is just all capitals. So you use basically bolding if you want to make something stand out. And also there is, as Nate actually talks about here, a couple of exceptions like eyes. So scrolling down, let's see. Sound Engraver says, same thing. Oh, somebody, so they're basically, your chat's not showing up. I apologize if it's on my end. As I said, if there's any digitization of my voice or anything wrong, or if I suddenly drop the stream, it's because we have a little bit of a rainstorm going on here that does affect my internet. But hopefully I left it long enough so that we are not going to have any of those problems right here. Michael says, glad it's not just me. So yeah, there's a couple of people having this problem. Let's see. Yes, Breaker says it's my internet curse again. Yes, indeed. Let's hope that again you can still hear me and it's not something that is going to affect the entire stream. Let's see. Scrolling down, Robert's here, and he says typography. Typography. I know a thing or two. Well, share it in the chat if you want to. That's great. Let's see. Yes. Indeed, Neil. I'm pleased nobody made a LOL stripper comment. Yes, strippers are people who worked in comics when comics had word balloons that were pasted onto the art. You would literally cut out the word balloon and um, put some glue on the back of it and paste it onto the original art itself. And then when it was taken a photograph of, if I do remember correctly, and there was a shadow because it lifted off at some point, then the stripper would have to go in and remove that shadow. So that's what strippers did. I don't think you can still get a job as a stripper in comic books now. Sorry. Scrolling down. Let's see here. Yes, we're all highbrow here. We don't talk about strippers in that vein, says Robert. Scrolling down. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see, scrolling down. Everybody's talking about strippers in the comment. Let's see. Scrolling down a little bit. Let's see what we got here. Tony says, for your Thor story, are you going to touch on the fact that the god Thor used to accept human sacrifice? Well, here's the thing. If you read Thomas Valiant, you know that Thor is one of the main bad guys, although he's portrayed pro although they see him in that world. Let me re-up the Crom the Destroyer art here for a second and go back to your comment. Although he's seen in that world as being one of the heroes, he's not really a hero, and we learn that through the story. And he is very much a villain. And the way that the rampaging Thor story works. And originally, I had written this rampaging Thor story as a text story, and then I converted it into, because this was a long time ago, and then I converted it into a script for Mike to actually do the art for. But yeah, he's not a hero, and it's very much the reason why I chose the rampaging Thor is because I'm trying to combine two things at once. Number one would be the idea of Thor from Marvel's old idea of Thor, which the idea is that he had he had Donald Blake, sorry, not Tony, Donald Blake as his alter ego. And I very much thought that the death of Donald Blake was really the beginning of the end for that character, although it happened in the Walter Simonson run, which I think is the best run in comics ever. I think that was a mistake. And I think that he needs that alter ego to keep him grounded. But with my Thor, he's not a hero. And it is basically a alter ego that he has attached to him. That is to say, it's like a rampaging Hulk kind of scenario, or your Incredible Hulk, whatever you want to look at it. But I think of the more Jekyll and Hyde way of looking at Marvel's Hulk was the Rampaging Hulk, which was a magazine that came out in the 70s. It was black and white. But anyways, so it's very much a Jekyll and Hyde kind of story. And the human part is the part that is his conscience. The human part is the part that is trying to gain control. And the supernatural godlike Thor part is the Jekyll part of the entire story. And yeah, he's not a hero. So actually, because if you read Thomas Valiant #1, there is a reference for Thor he's making for one of the offhand comments that he gives for Farrell, which is one of our actual heroes, is that he owned a slave that she reminds him of a slave he once owned. So yeah, I'm not trying to be the progressive type and to talk about slavery, but no, this is the history of the character. So yeah, we're going to go into the darker recesses of Thor, not so much with this first book, except for the fact that he does some things which are not typically what you would associate with being a hero, because he's not. It's his human side that is trying to keep him in check. But yeah, hopefully, if we get to do more Thor stories, we will see some of those not so nice parts of Thor. Although, again, I tried to make my books for all ages, so we won't go too far into showing such things, but there probably will be references to them because that is the history of the character. Let's see. Breaker says, I think multiple speech bubbles from multiple sources in a panel would work for a gag rambling discussion or a serious sensory overload scene, but maybe sound effects would work better. I would agree. There are some exceptions to that rule. One of the things that I do within the Valiant Heroes is that you have two conversations going on at once. So you can have more than two word balloons if you have more than one conversation going on. So I have a main conversation going on in a couple of panels, and in the background, you have a secondary conversation with people basically whispering to each other. So there's probably at least four characters on panel. Two of them are having a discussion with each other, and another two are having a discussion with each other. So again, you would have more than two word balloons in that kind of situation, and you're still not going to break the Eisner rule of, one snapshot of moment in time. And I agreed that, rambling would work in some way because it's more of an interruption, and the way that you would layer the word balloons there would be very interesting, and again, I think have a lot to do with how the reader actually reads what's going on, if there is an actual interruption or there's just a continuous babble. And the thing is that I did a video probably more than a year ago now, about probably 2 years ago now, about just rambling and babbling in comics, today's comics, not older comics, but today's. You get a lot of text in older comics. Let me tell you that. Compared to today, you get a lot of text per panel, but you don't get as much per word balloon, or things that are rambling rants, which are just soliloquies by some of your people who are actually in one panel. But again, with that rambling that you get today, they don't even consider the rules of actually how to do lettering correctly. And I think the writer is just running roughshod over everybody else, saying do it this way, without considering either the artist or the letterer and what they have to do in order to make everything work. But again, yeah, I would say again, there are some ways that you can actually put in more than two word balloons. Let's see. Scrolling down a little bit, Robert says, kerning is a pain sometimes. Yes, trying to figure out the different combinations of trying to put word spacings in, even with the temporary lettering that I did for the first 11 pages of Crom the Destroyer, which you can see on the Indiegogo site. Again, link for it is in the description. You can go over there and read the first 11 lettered pages of Crom the Destroyer, since it is 66 pages. I had no problem giving you the first 11, and you can see that I had a problem with the kerning, I guess is how you pronounce it, between some of the spaces, especially the eyes. You actually, I tried to put the spaces in as evenly as possible, but when it came to the eye, I actually had to put double spaces around the eyes in order to make it look the same as a single space around the other letters, which again, yeah, it's a pain. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see what else we got here. Talking about sound effects. I love talking about sound effects as well. Breaker says, red sound effects for bloodshed is always a nice touch. Yes, Eisner would agree with you completely. He talks about that in his book about making comics. He talks about, what does he do? He writes basically a narration for one of his comics in blood. So to give it a gory effect and to make the reader know just how serious things are. So yeah, he would completely agree with you on that. Let's see. Scrolling down a little bit. Michael says, can you use a stencil for drawing word balloons on actual paper? Well, again, that's what I think the older, let's say you're someone who's doing the art and everything. You're the writer, you're doing the art, you're doing the lettering. If you're someone who's doing the entire thing yourself, then use the old method. You want to use the old method? Yes, they would use stencils for their original, basically spacing for the word balloon, and then stick it in there, and then they would freehand it after that, as far as I know. That's the way that they usually did the old style, if you're doing basically the entire thing yourself. So yeah, stencils are always a good thing, but again, as I would say, Nate would probably tell you, to just freehand it over top of the stencil. It gives you just enough of a variation, so that your audience knows that they're not being trying to be tricked into reading something more mechanical than it is. Let's put it that way. Let's see. Let's see. Robert says, I back so many indie comics, I'm accumulating a backlog. Well, I'm sure that everyone in the indie comic scene appreciates that fact very much. Um, if you're not buying mainstream comics anymore, buy indie comics if you still want good comics. Um, so find indie comics that you would want to order and see if they're for you. And um, just really support comics if you keep on reading comics, because there's comics out there for you. You just got to know where to look for them. All right, let's see. Let's see. Scrolling down a little bit. Scrolling down. I see Poofy in the chat here talking up, saying, what's your favorite line in Thomas Valiant #1? My favorite line in Thomas Valiant #1. Well, quite honestly, it's a line that most people gloss right over. Um, Around, let's see, what page would it be? It's chapter 2, and it's about, I don't know, 6 or 8 pages in. I can't remember the exact page off the top of my head. So probably 38, around there. Anyways, there is a splash page where you have, again, I probably break the rule very poorly here of the Will Eisner rule of putting more than one part of a conversation on one panel. So again, before I knew better than to do this, and there is a part of that panel which isn't actually spoken by anyone, but it is a plaque which most people gloss over and don't actually read, and it explains why Thomas Valiant is actually going after this giant trophy, which is a giant sculpture which is made of gold. It's because it is a trophy, and any team that can basically capture this trophy from who has it proves themselves to be heroes. And that's what he's trying to do. Although this is something which you learn throughout the story, that he should be concentrating more on just doing heroic things rather than trying to prove himself a hero. But there's a plaque in there, and it talks about proving heroes. And I'm all about heroes and about having to look at heroes in the traditional sense, and proving yourself a hero is not by, again, going after trophies, which is what Thomas Valiant thinks that this line means. Again, I can't remember the exact line off the top of my head, but it is something that he learns by the end, that proving yourself a hero is within the worth of your actions, not within the worth of the audience that you're trying to capture by getting yourself a trophy. So, yeah, that's probably the key line to the entire thing. And unfortunately, most people miss it because they don't read that small panel which has the plaque on it, thinking, because there's two plaques actually in that one scene, and Farrell reads one of them. Thomas Valiant is basically lovingly touching the other because he knows about the fact that this trophy is not in the hands of actual heroes anymore, and he wants to bring it back to heroic individuals. So yeah, that's you get me talking about Thomas Valiant, I'm going to go off. That's a great question, Puffy. Thank you very much for that. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see who we got here. Eddie says, such a great subject to learn about. Agreed. Who is in your, let me just take a look here. Is that Narcissist as your avatar, Eddie? Not sure. Looks like Narcissist. He looking at himself in a pool of water. I'm just saying. Scrolling down, scrolling down. What do we got here? Sound Engravers says, thank you very much for shouting out her channel. No problem, Sound Engraver. Like I said, go on over to Sound Engraver's channel and check out what she does. Scrolling down, Tony has a question. What are your thoughts on the Nolan Batman films? I don't know exactly. I think that Batman has gotten away from DC at this point. It has gotten away from them in so much as the heart of the character is no longer portrayed in many of the books that he's in many of the Elseworld stories, certainly that they publish over and over again, nor is the heart of the character portrayed correctly in the movies. And I would um, even go back to what was Batman 89, was it? That the first Michael Keaton Batman came out because he killed, right? I remember when it came out and people were like, yeah, Batman doesn't kill. He shouldn't be doing this, that, and the other thing. But here you have in the Nolan films, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I haven't watched them in a while, nor do I really care to rewatch them because they're not something that really sticks in my mind. The plot is not good enough to bring me back time and again to watch these movies. It's more of a nostalgia draw and trying to make it so gritty that it makes up for the lack of story. So there, I'm not a big fan. I certainly watched them and enjoyed them as much as I could while they came out, but it's not something I'm going to, because I'm someone who, let me put it this way, I'm someone who likes to collect physical media more and more because I think that digital media is being corrupted in so many ways. There's stories over the last couple of months about the digital versions of what is it? Not the Manchurian Candidate, but the French Connection. Yeah, digital copies of the French Connection that are available through library services. Especially, there's one library service which is there for the preservation of movies themselves, are editing out some of the French Connection. Why? Because he uses some nasty words that you're not supposed to use today that start with the letter N. And so they're actually corrupting the entire thing. And it takes the character and it destroys it in some little fashion because you don't understand exactly where he's coming from. So I like digital media. That's my little rant. I like digital media. I like buying older digital media, and I add to my digital media as much as I can, which isn't a lot, but every once in a while. I usually just go to flea markets and things like that. But if I saw the Batman film and or the Nolan Batman and they were at a flea market somewhere for $1, I'm not sure I'd pick them up. I really wouldn't. I mean, because I don't know if I'd want to watch them again. That's really the thing. Scrolling down, Graver corrects me and says she has a master's in music. Oh, well, I have a master's in political theory. I don't know. I'd say your master's in music is probably more um, useful than mine. Scrolling down. Let's see. What do we got here? Oh, Game says, RJ, it is not boring. Thank you very much. This is not a boring subject. I don't think it's a boring subject, but hopefully I'm not boring other people. So that's one of the things I don't want to do. Let's see. Scrolling down. Tony, no, everybody have fun tonight. Says tiny lettering is a big problem in indie comics. Everybody works on computer and zooms in. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, it's one of the things. Again, I have Eric Weathers working. He did my last book, and he has agreed to do the second book, although he's doing his own stuff right now. So I'll have to contact him again because we're about to letter the first part of one of the three for the Valiant Heroes. Anyways, so yeah, he's a great letterer and he does know his stuff, especially with putting things in. Because for me, anyways, I thought to myself when I was looking at it digitally, this looks a little bit too large, but no, he was right on the money for the size that he put in there. And it does cramp your style sometimes as a writer, let me tell you that. And it might hide a little bit of your art if you're not used to editing, but the proper lettering again needs to be big enough so that you can see it, so that you don't strain your eyes, so that you're not distracted from actually reading the story. Let's see. Robert says, I continue to share your stuff. You deserve a larger audience. Thank you very much. Um, if you if you want to share my stuff, I would profusely thank anybody who shares my stuff because I think that's the only chance of me having growing an audience at this point is through sharing things because I think YouTube has done promoting anything with me since I hit the 20,000 subscriber mark. And so more power to anybody who wants to share my stuff. Thank you very much. And the more you share my stuff, the more people I get for subscribers, the more comics I can sell, more comics I can sell, the more comics I can make, the more comics I can make, the better we have of just a rich history of comics and bringing comics back to what they should be. Let's see, in my own small way, I'll put that in there, certainly. Let's see, scrolling down, scrolling down. Oh, Neil Breaker says his avatar is um, Nine Ball from Armored Core. To me, it just looks like a Gundam. But hey, I used to have Gundams hanging from my ceiling back in the 80s. Literally, back in the 80s, I had Gundams hanging from my ceiling. So yeah, let's see. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Da, 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 How much can you bench press? I don't bench press. Um, uh, I was just talking to, I was just on, um, well, I guess it's John's Long Box channel. We did a live stream just about 3 hours ago, and we were talking a little bit about a couple of things. I did farm work when I was younger for a long time. And I talked about that on that live stream just for a second. And I worked on a lot of different farms, different kinds of farms, cattle, just vegetable, tobacco farms. And when I worked on the tobacco farm, I actually injured my upper arms and the ligaments, especially in my elbows to a certain extent, because you do repetitive movements all the time, especially when you're picking tobacco. So I injured them to some extent. So I don't bench press, nor do I curl, because it puts a strain on both the ligaments and the nerves in my arms. So what I do, if anybody wants to know, I do isometrics and calisthenics, which, by the way, you can get yourself some nice looking muscles through calisthenics and isometrics, which won't hurt your nerves or won't strain your ligaments as much as something like bench pressing would. So that's just my uh, little bit to answer that question. Let's see. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Da, da, da. Oh, he's talking to Robert, I think. But anyways, I'll answer the question because I can't read everybody's comments at once, so I don't know if you're talking to me or anybody else. But hey, it's something I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Scrolling down, scrolling down, scrolling down. Vaz is here in the chat. Says, did you look at the new Conan the Barbarian Titan comics? It feels like a return to the old Conan with more narrative style and a layout, not unlike Savage Sword of Conan. I have the what is it? The preview for it, which was the free comic day preview. So I did get to preview the art, and I agree completely. It has a good layout. To me, it looks like Kubert, Kubert art with a K. Very good stuff. Beautiful art, but I did not get to buy the first issue because I think it was about a month ago, my local comic shop went out of business. And there are two comic shops. I'm pretty far away for me, anyways. It's a bit of a journey to get to the nearest town. And the nearest town had two comic shops. One I refused to go to because it is progressive as all get out, shoving things in your face. And quite literally, I think if they knew who I was and the fact that I publish things and talk to people from Comicsgate and use the hashtag Comicsgate, they would throw me out the door. So I specifically will not buy from them. I bought from the secondary guy who was a hole in the wall, and he has now gone out of business. So I'm going to have to wait until I go traveling to pick up the Conan the Barbarian, that or get them shipped to me directly from Titan Comics or some other place. So I will be late in reading those comics, but I have heard such good things about them that I will be ordering them and buying them. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. That new comic video has a philosophy not unlike the music academics in college. No oral foreground. Is that how you pronounce that? Middle ground or background. Yeah. Art to me is just I'm glad that you see it in something else than comics, because I see it in movies, I see it in comics, I see it sometimes in prose writing, but the fact that someone sees these exact same things within a music sound engraver just goes to show that the arts have been corrupted, just like the university systems. And unfortunately, if we want traditional ways of actually understanding good art, we're going to have to make that art ourselves. So scrolling down, let's see here. What does Breaker say? There was a bit of a redo, RJ, at the beginning. It's been stable up until this point. Great. Uh, Rebo. Sorry. Let's see. Scrolling down. Da, da, da. Breaker also says classical mythology heroes did some crazy things, we'll just put it that way. In the unsanitized myths, even Samson in the book of Judges wasn't a model hero. One of the things I always say, and I've said this on my channel since the very beginning, if you go back and read Snorri's original works for the Norse myth, so I can't remember his full name. Basically, it's someone who I don't know even when he did it. So his name is Snorri. Um, one of the abbreviations of his name, anyways. But even then, he was basically translating old stories, and we have nothing but very scant descriptions of the Old Norse stuff, especially with tablets and some kinds of historical writings like that. But anyways, if you go back to Snorri, which is the most extant form of the Norse myth, it is quite a slog to get through, and you will quite easily see that these are Viking heroes, so called, and Viking gods, because, yeah, they do things that you would not expect a hero to do in any way, shape, or form. And you wouldn't call them heroes. You'd call them, again, mythological figures, even though within a lot of their books, they're portrayed as heroes. They're shown to be in some of the stories that way. Um, Even to some extent, if you go back to the Celtic myth, you'll see a little bit of that, not as much as you will in the Norse. We are used to very much the classical Roman and Greek myth, but even there, you get things like Zeus's rape of Ganymede and things like that. So yeah, you get a lot of these old mythological heroes that do some pretty nasty things at times. So I'm not going to shy away from that. Let's just put it that way. So scrolling down. Eddie says, looking forward to reading more of the Rampaging Thor. Great to hear. Hopefully we will get to do so. I'm thinking up until, I don't know if I'll do another campaign like the Valiant Heroes, which was 3 stories in one. So you could either get them as floppies or the 3 stories with an additional backup story as the graphic novel. Not sure that's the best method to do it in. We might, I'm not entirely sure. For now, the idea is that we're going to make, so the next one the next campaign to come out is going to be Thomas Valiant #2. Instead of being 80 pages, it's going to be 66 pages for the main story. And then we're going to have a 22-page backup story, which is the size of a normal floppy, depending on when you're looking at it in comic history. So that one will be a backup story that is written by Don Chen and myself and has Mike Gustovich art. So we're going to put backup stories like floppies, the size of floppies in the back part of the comics. So I think that's the plan for now. So when we can get another Rampaging Thor out there, I'm not entirely sure. Let's see. Scrolling down. Oh, I lost my place since I had to redo the back up here. Let's see. I've been going on for more than an hour now. I'll try to get to the bottom of these comments. Let's see. Michael says, speaking of classical characters, do you think that there is any virtue in the Phantom of the Opera character, or is he just an irredeemable monster? I've never been one to actually sit down and watch the entire thing of Phantom of the Opera, so I really could not answer that question. I know, of course, some of the some of the musical, but that was about it. I couldn't even tell you what the story is. So I'm sorry, but I can't answer that question. Scrolling down a little bit. Would you consider the Shadow to be the intellectual and physical equal to the Batman? That's a good question. Because for Kit Fox and especially the redemption of Kit Fox, which I'm doing, which Renzo just finished doing, it's one of the three for the Valiant Heroes that you're going to get. I tried to mix basically Batman, the Shadow, and Sherlock Holmes. I don't think they're intellectual on the same level. I really don't. Although there are hints in different versions of Batman at that. Batman is very much the detective, but he's a detective in, I don't know how you would put it, a style that is much more on the ground, much more taking clues and things like that, where the Shadow actually depends so much on his spy network to do the actual footwork for him to get things done. And then he cleans up the mess that the network actually points him towards who the crook is and what they've done and all these kinds of things. So honestly, you'll see the intellectual makeup of the Shadow as part of a system, whereas Batman is the entire system unto himself. So again, don't know if you could compare those two or if they're apples and oranges. So it's very interesting question. But again, I think it's comparing apples and oranges just because of the different ways that each of them operate. And I think their intellect is in their crime fighting ability to detect who is evil and who is the villain. So yeah, scrolling down, I'll try to get through a little more of these before I have to go. Breaker says, I really need to get myself a Ripperverse short box to store all my indies. That's a good idea. All right, let's see. Scrolling down here, scrolling down. Robert says, Zorro is the archetype for Batman, possibly an archetype for most current superheroes with an alter ego. Um, yes, I would agree. He is supposed to be the original, I think, the original inspiration for what they were going for with Batman as opposed to just being a clone of the Shadow. I throw some Zorro in there. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Conversations about Zorro in the comments. Let's see, let's see. Da da da. Honestly, this is not for me, but I'm going to read it anyways because it's an interesting conversation. Bruce seeing Zorro, the gay Blade, on the night of his parents' death was a big hint to that. Yeah, indeed it was. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Da, da. Hmm. I'm not sure, Puffy, if this question is for me, but I don't think I can answer it anyways. Do you know anything about Dan Harmon's story Circle? Is that the what is it? The hero's journey? Is that what that is? If you're talking about the hero's journey, quite honestly, all he did was paraphrase Aristotle in a more concise way than Aristotle ever would, because Aristotle's works that we have are actually just notes, basically from his students as they were taking notes from his lectures. Anyways, let's see, scrolling down. Eddie says, good eye, RJ. It's a little self deprecating humor on my part. Oh, for narcissists. Okay, there you go. All right, let's see. Scrolling down. Robert says he loves physical media. I'm right there with you. I have quite a library. Mine is growing. I have quite a library of old VHS tapes, but they're degrading fairly quickly, and so is my VCR player. So, I'm going to try to get DVDs of things, although they degrade quick as well. But at the very least, I have a copy of something. Let's see. Tony says, what are your thoughts on Wonder Woman's creator, William Marston? Yeah, he was a bit of a, well, let's just say he was a bit of a perv. And I think that's where Wonder Woman came from. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Yeah. I honestly think that the real, because it went from that being something of a bondage fetish for this guy to, um, really campy stories about Wonder Woman, which I don't really care for. Then you had the 60s Wonder Woman where she was stripped of all her powers. Um, and there was a bunch of weird things about some kind of mentor in there. I can't remember, that was Chinese. And that was just a disaster. And after that, they went back to the camp for Wonder Woman, and it was awful. I can remember reading them back in the 70s. They were awful. But really, I think that George Perez and the George Perez run of Wonder Woman is really what brought that character into its own and is the character that we now know and understand. I think they really killed that character and the goodness within Wonder Woman. The George Perez goodness that he gave to the character, not just him, but also, of course, all the people that worked on the book. Um, but they killed that with the New 52, unfortunately, when she's basically given a sword instead of her lasso. And, the lasso of truth is something that within the 80s, that became something of a symbol for heroism. And replacing it with the main weapon as a sword, yeah, that was a mistake in my estimation. But yeah, I wouldn't go back to those early Wonder Womans. But it's sometimes funny where those characters come from. And in if you notice in the Valiant Hero, no, Thomas Valiant #1, I have a Wonder Woman like character that is shown on the map, and in one of the panels, there's a statue to a Wonder Woman like character, very much an Amazon, but the old Greek Amazon, not so much your DC version of an Amazon. And you'll get to see that character a little more within the redemption of Kit Fox, if you're wondering. So scrolling down, see if we can get to the end here. Uh, since I've been going on for quite a while now, getting physical copies of video games from the 360 and PS3 generation onwards is a lot more frustrating since companies can patch out the problematic bits, unfortunately. Unfortunately. Let's see. Sound Engraver says, honestly, RJ, I learned how to analyze and compose, but my master's was a walk in the park. I did what I wanted. I made it sound interesting enough for my professors. Good on you. Uh, that's all I can say. Let's see. Scrolling down. Tony says, "Are you a fan of EC comic horror titles?" Titles have never really been my thing, so I've never really got into EC comics. But again, that's just because horror is not really my thing. Scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. Yeah, I got to answer this. Uh, I hope those Gundams were one-to-one models. Yeah, no, I wish they were, but no, unfortunately not. Let's see. All right, we got Taz in the chat. I think Taz hasn't been here for a while. Nice to see you. How you doing? Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, sounded great. We're talking about her masters. Needless to say, you don't need a master's to learn what to learn. Yeah, exactly. I got my master's. I got two undergraduate degrees, and then I went for my master's. And really, I found that the discrepancy between actually going from my second undergrad to a master's was a downgrade to some extent. And at that point, I learned, yeah, if I want to learn anything, I can learn it myself. And find a way to do that, which is going to save me money and time. So that's what I did after that point. Let's see. Let's see. Breaker says farming is tough, but essential service. It is indeed. Da, da, da. Let's see. Question here from Dragon. Did you see they banned trans women from competing in girl sports? No, I didn't see that. Although it might only be in certain places. Certainly, even some states and not other states, you never know. Puffy says, RJ works out, respect. Well, honestly, the great thing I found about working out is that you don't have to go very hard in order to build muscle. You just have to be very consistent and be patient. If you're willing to spend years being consistent, you again, some for me, someone with bad joints to some extent, just because of the work I had to do. That pays off. Let's see. Scrolling down, Robert says, respect for farmers. Definitely indeed. Uh, and Eddie says, art's corrupted very much. Most definitely. Let's see. Scrolling down. Oh, I'm getting behind on these comments, but I got 30 people in the chat. I'm not going to leave until I answer everybody's questions. Let's see. Robert has a good statement here. He says, I'm reading Robert E. Howard's boxing stories. He knows how to write an action scene. He does indeed. He has a unique way of doing so. It's very much an old style. I think, again, his characters are not only inspired from Celtic myth, but so is his storytelling method. If you go back and read something like Edith Hamilton's giant tome on Irish mythology, you will see what I'm talking about. Robert E. Howard has very much a Celtic myth style of writing, and it is very much an Irish way of speaking, expressing yourself, and acting. And so I would doubt not at all that translates into boxing as well. Scrolling down, Sound Engraver has a super chat for me. Thank you very much, Sound Engraver. And again, I'll have to say for the third time tonight, go over to Sound Engraver's channel and check her out if you want to see stuff like I do, but concentrating on music. So always do good work. Very much a something that you should put on, I don't know, the front of your desk. Make sure that everybody understands that merit is what you're shooting for. Scrolling down. Let's see if I have any more questions here. Oh, Rex is in the chat as well. Rex says, while Superman was inspired by Doc Savage, his other major inspiration was John Carter of Mars, but he developed into his own over time. There was also a strong man that he was, I can't remember the strong man's name off the top of my head, but there was a strong man, basically just a guy who was basically what you would call a power lifter or a bodybuilder right now, somewhere between the two, that was one of the inspirations for Superman as well. I think that would be something that would take into consideration the Doc Savage part of it. Let's see, scrolling down. Not sure if some of these comments are for me or not, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit because everybody's having a bit of a conversation in the chat. So I'm going to scroll down. Hopefully I don't miss anybody's questions, and see if we can get down to the bottom. People are talking about a lot of different things. Oh, here's a good question from Tony. What are your thoughts on Plastic Man's creator, Jack Cole? I don't know much about Jack Cole at all. Honestly, I don't. I know his work. I don't know anything about the man himself, so I couldn't say. But I do appreciate what he did with Plastic Man, and some of the gags that he pulled with that comic. It was something that was a bit of an inspiration. I'll have to admit, the comics themselves, not the man, because again, I don't know the man, but the comics themselves, an inspiration to some extent for Thomas Valiant, because I wanted to take the idea of an amorphous character, because again, he can be anything, and he has to shape himself into a hero, and at the same time he's trying to keep his own shape together, because he's something like a Plastic Man that doesn't at times have full control over his powers. So to keep control of his shape, to be prudent, to have those heroic virtues, that's all part and parcel of that character for me, for Thomas Valiant, that is. All right, getting down to the end of the chat, but I've been talking for an hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes, I guess. So let's see, scrolling down. Puffy says, I need to go back up and look at her comment. Let's see. Okay, we'll go back up, Puffy. What does it say? Dan Harmon's story circle is a bit more condensed than the hero's journey. Harmon is the writer for Rick and Morty, so it is more for a plot guide tool for the episodes on TV. No, but I'm not familiar with that then. So something I will have to at some point take a look at and see if I can figure out where it comes from. But if it is a condensed version of the hero's journey, again, the hero's journey comes from Aristotelian descriptions of heroism and one of his lost works, which is his work on tragedy. Although we do get a very good glimpse of that lost work in Aristotle's work on comedy. So, anyways, I think I've gotten down to the end of the chat. Oh, Taz has one more comment here, and then I'm probably going to have to take off. RJ, is your Thor going to be hands on with Earth via world heroes or more with Asgard? No, I'm not going to show any Asgardian things in it. He's going to be the story is set in World War II, so we're very much stuck in this world, although we're in the past, and we're not going to be going into anything like that for the Rampaging Thor in the near future, anyways. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Puffy says, "I'm not a girl." For with a name like Puffy, sometimes you might be confused. Let's see. Scrolling down, I'll get into one more comment. Rex says, "Just an observation, but given the focus on Batman having morally ambiguous methods guy, I think he'd likely be the one to go crazy with Superman stopping him. You think so?" Not entirely sure. I understand exactly what you're talking about because so Batman is morally ambiguous. I think he's likely to be the one to go crazy and Superman have to stop him rather than the other way around. I guess is what your comment means, I suppose. But I don't think, again, it is something that it's not something I don't think that, as I said in my last video, that Miller actually wanted to explore with the character for Batman itself. I don't think that's where he wanted to go with it. He just wanted to, in some extent, uh, to some extent, he talks about trying to explore his own mortality, Miller himself, because he was getting older and he wanted to explore a character that he always knew as getting older. So I don't think people, and especially the movies, do justice to Miller's work. And Miller himself, I don't think, was trying to do what most people think he was doing with Batman. Anyways, so I want to thank everybody for showing up. We have 30 people here in the chat now. And I want to, again, thank everybody for showing up, participating in the chat, giving me good questions to go over, and appreciating comics and the making of comics. Next week, hopefully I'll have a new topic for you, maybe go over some more of the Eisner stuff, depending on what I get myself into in my studying of making comics over the next week, I guess. So just a reminder, the links are in the description for anybody who comes in late or wants to know where you can find my graphic novels, The Valiant Heroes, Thomas Valiant, and Crom the Destroyer. You can order all of those off of Indiegogo. The links for all of those three are in the description. And again, we have about 20 days left in the campaign for Crom the Destroyer. The Valiant Heroes has gone into demand, but you can still get a copy of it. And you can get a copy of the Valiant Heroes if you order, or sorry, you can get a copy of Thomas Valiant if you order a copy of the Valiant Heroes. So again, Crom the Destroyer is the one I'm concentrating on now. So I'm going to leave you with the outro, which is my second trailer for Crom the Destroyer, which is about 45 seconds long, so not terribly long. Give you a good taste of what Crom the Destroyer is about. Thank you once again for everybody that has come, and I'll see you all later. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.